Okay, good evening, friends. Okay, let us continue with what we were doing. So, we were talking about the development of geography in the modern times, and first we talked about the German school of thought. We have to start with that, and I have given the essence of all these. In fact, I'll just sum up the various school of thoughts which were present during this period, and you will be finding that one important was the German school. And if I have to associate German school with any philosophy, I would say that it is associated with determinism, and second, it is associated more with the physical geography. So that is one. French school, if we talk about here, it is associated with possibilism, and it is associated with more with human geography. If you talk about the British school, we will see that the British school is more associated with it. It was a school of thought where number of things were developed. If I have to talk about, one is historical geography or historical approach was quite developed here, and second, importantly, you can say that regional specialism was something which was quite developed here. One question was given for homework. I think I gave you that question. एक उसका answer is already written. So after the class, I'll post that model answer for you, and the second one भी थोड़ी देर में will post. Verenius and Kant, I think, was one of the things which was given to you. So that answer is already model answer उसका prepared है. Just I have to post that, and I will post it night time after the class. And the second one is to be written. उसको will write and give it to you. And please, again, I will suggest one very important thing. When you are submitting your answers, please first self-evaluate, then मेरे पास भेजो. It is better, because otherwise, I have so many students. More than 500 students are there in my 500 plus classes. There are test series students, old students. They send me questions, and again, it becomes very, very difficult that I would be able to evaluate all of them. So I always suggest students that you please self-evaluate. If you feel that you have written well, and probably you will get above 50% marks, then you submit those answers to me. And UPSC में 50% marks मिलना easy नहीं है. Always remember, वो school वाला 50% नहीं चलता. Okay. Emergence of French and German school. Now we are going to study, so you will be better in a position to write that. Okay. So British school is more associated with historical approach and regional specialism. Then there are two more schools: American school and the Russian school. If I talk about them, it was here where the dichotomies and dualism were most developed. ठीक है. So remember this summary of the school of thoughts, because in this there will be too many scholars which would be coming to us, which we have to know about. But Some of them are more important, others are comparatively less important. So for example, first one I have talked about here, Oscar Peschel. So if you talk about Peschel, he was influenced by Darwinian tradition and viewed geography as systematic empirical science. So you see how that Darwinian tradition of objectivity was beginning to influence the German school of thought, where laws were to be developed through method of induction. So he preferred inductive approach. He felt that it was more scientific way of formulating natural laws and theories. Peschel was essentially a physical geographer who studied geomorphological phenomena like lakes. He excluded the study of man. So you see very clearly, excluded the study of man from geography, as he was of the view that systematic science can be developed only if the focus was on physical features of the earth. Okay? So that is basically one of the scholars, Oscar Peschel. I would say not very important. Okay. So if you feel like it is too much names are coming now, Oscar Peschel is one which is not very important for me. Okay. One thing to know, during this period in Germany, there were two prevalent terms in German school, and these were two ways of study. And one was basically Erdkunde. Erdkunde was essentially what? Earth sciences. And Erdkunde basically, it is related with systematic approach. Okay. Second, if you talk about was Landerkunde. And Landerkunde was the regional sciences, that is the regional approach. So Peschel, what he did, he tried to shift the focus from Landerkunde to Erdkunde. Okay. So before Peschel, you can understand who was the very prominent geographer before Peschel in geography, who was exclusively geographer. Tell me, in Germany, who was that? हमने बात किया उसके बारे में. It was Karl Ritter. Okay, so we have already seen Ritter's influence in geography was very strong, and Germany was very strong. So Ritter talked about this regional geography. We have already seen his approach was regional geography approach. ठीक है, although उसकी किताब का नाम था Erdkunde. His book name of Ritter was Erdkunde, but in that Erdkunde he adopted the Landerkunde approach, that is the regional approach. Because we have seen, if you remember, what was the basic idea of Ritter? Whole is reflected in it in all its parts. Do you remember that? So his objective was definitely to find the systematic laws, but the method was what? To study the parts and find out. Okay, so that was the contribution of Peschel. But one name which I have to remember is that of Richthofen. This is, here I will keep on writing which are to be remembered absolutely, that is Richthofen. Okay. So Richthofen was basically I would say he was of the tradition of Landerkunde. That means he was essentially in the tradition of regional geographer. He preferred more the regional approach, and he basically identified that there are two trends in regional geography. In fact, these two trends are also the two steps according to him. Two steps of regional geography. And what were these two steps of regional geography? One was chorography and the other was chorology. Okay, so first was chorography and the second was what? Chorology. So I'll explain this part. When you are going to do regional geography, first thing what you will do? You will first, can I say first step would be to collect information, or better said, geographical information about a particular area? Yes or no? Tell me. Like, अगर मैं अफ्रीका वाला ही एग्जाम्पल लूँ, if I take the example of Africa, first what I did, I talked about that it is mainly old plateau surface which is made up of hard igneous and metamorphic rocks. I talked about, we calculated another data that it is tropical, mostly tropical climate is found here. We found another data that what type of vegetation is there, tropical, evergreen and deciduous, plus there is savanna and desert is found here. We know that here there is presence of red soil is the most common soil, plus there is very commonly found is desert soil. ठीक है. So tell me, यहाँ पर हम क्या कर रहे हैं? What we are doing here? Can I say first we are more concerned about description of the phenomena? Yes or no? Tell me. Are we here as the first step? Are we more concerned about description of the phenomena? So this description of phenomena here if I use the word rather than phenomena, if I use the word region, it would be more better. So this step, that is the first step, is referred to as chorography. Chorography. ठीक है. But if I stop here, tell me, if I just stop at the description part, can I say it becomes very boring? Yes or no? Don't you think that it becomes too much boring? And I don't think that I need to tell about this boring aspect of geography or this regional description. Can I say कि this was the basic reason why geography was one of the subjects, for me it was at least one of the most boring subjects in my class. Till class 10th you all must have studied geography, and the only thing interesting in geography classes that used to be for us was that if you remember, one game used to be there जिसमें we used to play, we used to have the atlas and वो अपने बगल वाले को वो places दे दिया, we find and कि अब उसमें से ढूंढ के दिखाओ. So there was a fixed time, in that fixed time 1 minute or whatever, that person had to find from that atlas that place. So class में geography classes में this was the way we used to pass our time in the classes. You can understand how much boring it was. And why it was so much boring? Because majority of the geography teachers, what they do, they are essentially more concerned with the description of the phenomena rather than explaining the phenomena. So if you the science or if the subject academic stops there just at description, can I say it would just become an encyclopedic discipline? It would just become an encyclopedia. Yes or no? It would just remain as encyclopedia. And what is very important, that we also try to understand why it is. ठीक है. So we have already done, for example, याद है हमने देखा था कि how all these things we can relate and explain why there is red soil, why there is desert soil. We can ultimately explain and reach to some conclusions. So there is lots of explanation. We can explain why most of Africa has tropical climate, because if we look into Africa, can we say that almost it is, equator is cutting the continent through half? So we can explain many of the phenomena. We can explain why it is more old plateau, because it was essentially the core of Pangaea. and it is mostly shields which collided or cratons which collided and made up Africa. So we can explain many of the phenomena, and then what will happen? It would become much more interesting. So, and also not only interesting but also science. That is what is the aspect of science. So according to Ritter, second step is what? Once this has been collected, this information has been collected, the second step is the interrelations between these geographical variables. Geographical variables to bring out what? To bring out explanations and uniqueness of the region which we are studying. So this part is essentially referred to as chorology. Chorology. So what is the, according to Ritter, according to Richthofen, what is essentially the ultimate aim of a regional geographer? He will start with chorography. Graphy here means what? Graphy is essentially, you can understand, graphy is the description, while if you talk about logy, here is what? It is science. And Koro, we already know, Koro is essentially, the meaning of Koro is region. Okay. So what is the ultimate aim of a regional geographer? Regional geographer ultimate aim is to develop science of geography, science of regions. He would although start with chorography and end with chorology. Are we clear about this idea? We know this integration which he is talking about. Tell me, interrelations that he is talking about in the second step, who was the person before him talked about these interrelations, and in which concept he talked about? Who will tell me? It was none other than Carl Ritter. Here I will not write actually. It was this interrelationships, if you talk about, it was first person who was talking about was Carl Ritter. And if you talk about Carl Ritter, what was his idea? He talked about, if you remember, vertical unity concept. Do you remember that? वर्टिकल यूनिटी कंसेप्ट. ठीक है. हाँ, मुझे पता था कि एक आदमी जरूर गलत बताएगा, बलवीर. आई ऑलरेडी न्यू कि यू विल से हम्बोल्ट. तुम रिवाइज नहीं करता ऐसे से. और यू आर इन टू मच हरी टू बी फर्स्ट, even without thinking you are speaking. Okay. So basically that is the basic idea which was presented by Richthofen, and he was the forerunner of the new geography. New geography was basically what? This new geography was the scientific geography which was evolving. New geography in Germany. He was mainly a physical geographer who was determinist by the tradition. He was mainly what? He was a biogeographer. To him, geography was a science of Earth's surface where phenomena were to be interrelated in an area or region. Thus, he followed regional approach. That is, for example, steppe region of Central Asia. He elaborated that. Richthofen tried to develop geography as a discipline, first explicit attempt of this regional geography was developed. As a geography, in fact देखो actually में यहाँ से continuation है, and this is not, it is just continuation as a science of chorology or science of regions, as he believed that geography should perceived detailed investigation of smallest areas or region and focus attention on diverse phenomena and their interrelationship. So for Richthofen, what is the crux of what we are here talking about? For Richthofen, what was geography? For him, geography was the science of regions. In other words, geography was basically what? It was chorology. Okay. So tell me, I will remember Richthofen for mainly this aspect. This is very important aspect of Richthofen. Okay. Are we clear about this? Then after Richthofen, there was a very significant person who emerged in geographical thoughts. And देखो, till Richthofen was there, you saw that हमने देखा during this period. Before him there was Oscar Peschel. So tell me, can we say Peschel was for systematic approach? Yes or no? He was for systematic approach, and Richthofen tried to establish regional approach. Can you understand this point? That means that during this period there was none approach which was dominating. Out of these two approaches, there was dominance of none of these. Yes or no? That means both were simultaneously being studied in Germany. One was the Erdkunde, which was the systematic approach, and other was the Länderkunde, which was the regional approach. That means there was no one approach which was dominant. Both were present simultaneously. But with the appearance of Ratzel, we will find that systematic approach actually became more dominant. Okay, with him, which approach became more dominant? It was systematic approach which became dominant. So it was Frederick Ratzel, very important person. At many places we will see later on, he'll come. So again, from my side, it is what? It is very important to remember Ratzel. And Ratzel, we can definitely say he was basically what? He was his approach was systematic approach. Okay. So he also developed this approach which we call it as new determinism or scientific determinism. Okay. New is different. New determinism is associated with Taylor. If you have read your NCERT, here we are using the word new determinism, not neo. New determinism or the scientific determinism, and we will see that scientific determinism was what? Basically talking about this interrelationship, developing these interrelationships a step further. Okay, like for example, if I say that in Africa there is Negro or black skin people found, the texture of the skin, the color of the skin in Africa is what? It is black. So can I say it is essentially because there is collection or accumulation of melanin in their skin because of long exposure to direct sunlight, high intensity sunlight? Yes or no? Tell me. So this type of determinism, where I am scientifically trying to prove the geographical phenomena, this type of determinism is what it is referred to as the scientific determinism. So in scientific determinism, it is what? It is based upon cause effect relationship. It is essentially based upon cause effect relationship. ठीक है. So that is basically what it is, scientific determinism. And he wrote a very important book by the name of Anthropogeography. Very famous book, Anthropogeography. And this book, Anthropogeography, had 2 volumes, volume 1 and volume 2. In volume 1, Ratzel mainly developed physical geography, concepts of physical geography, and mainly adopted a deterministic theme. Here he seems to be clearly influenced by the Darwinian ideology, was very profound. So he was one of the persons who was very much motivated by the ideas of Darwin. In this book, he developed concepts like inorganic control and organic responses, like for example, how animals are essentially controlled by the laws of nature. How in biogeography, for example, animals are determined by or biological traits are determined by the environment. So means environment is determining the biological characters. Okay? Here he didn't include actually human beings. Human beings were just animals. And in fact, it was this volume 1, it influenced so many people like Ellen Semple. This is not Simon, it is Herbert Spencer. इसको सही कर लो, Herbert Spencer. ठीक है. So influenced many determinists which later developed this environmental determinism. The people, 2 very important names, Ellen Semple and Herbert Spencer. This book led to development of paradigm of environmental determinism. We'll see. It ultimately developed as environmental determinism later on, this concept. This book had so much influence. It was, in fact, we'll see this lady geographer, Ellen C. Semple, was the one who ultimately developed this environmental determinism, where environment is seen to be the primary factor which determines all the human activities. Okay? So are we clear about volume 1 of Anthropogeography? Yes or no? Okay. Then volume 2. And in volume 2, what was the thing he did? He reversed his approach and wrote more from human-centric perspective, focusing on description of civilization, races, cultures, and whilst doing so, he again tried to follow a scientific or systematic approach and demonstrated that even the cultural phenomena could be subjected to systematic studies, that you can also study culture. He tried to explain at various places the aspect of culture. Anthropogeography it is. Ellen C. Semple, लिखा तो है यार एल्बिन. Okay, so cultural phenomena can also be studied scientifically. He tried to explain even the cultural phenomena. He showed there were some glimpses, here you can say some glimpses of possibilism. Okay? And one of the reasons was that if you talk about Ratzel, one of the people he was very much influenced by was Kant. So that Kant's positive ideas were basically there in his writing. Okay? So here he is trying to do what? He is trying to say that even human geography, before you remember, tell me, can I say before this period, have we seen that there was a person named Verenius? And Verenius said that human geography cannot be studied through scientific principle or systematically. Do you remember? Human geography could not be studied as general geography because humans are not subjected to the scientific method. So he recommended that when you are studying human geography should be studied in a regional manner because every human phenomena is unique. But here can you see that what he is doing? He is trying to show that even human activities can be reasoned out. There are reasons for the human phenomena. Okay, so there he tries to explain, in his volume 2 he tried to explain civilizations, races and cultures. Here also see you can also write here that in volume 2 his basic approach still is what? Determinist. His basic approach still remains deterministic. But tell me that because he was bringing the explanations of civilizations, races, variety of cultural phenomena, can I say that he was giving a special status to human beings? Yes or no? He was essentially giving a special status to the human beings. And that is why we are saying that there is glimpses of possibilism can be seen. In fact, this was one of the books, volume 2 was one of the books which influenced the founder of possibilism, that is Vidal de Lablache, father of possibilism, founder of possibilism, Vidal de Lablache of the French school of thought. Okay? So this was a very, very important book which had influence on so many people, particularly Vidal. Okay? So that is the volume 2. Thus, through his anthropogeography, he demonstrated that systematic approach can be applied to both physical and human geography. Both physical and human geography. So, can you say here, by this statement, can I say that through his anthropogeography, he demonstrated that there is synthesis in geography? Tell me, yes or no? Isn't he demonstrating a kind of synthesis in geography? Isn't he trying to show that both the branches of geography are united by approach and methodology? There is common thing between them? Yes or no? There is common thing between them. They are united by what? They are united by methodology and approach. So, we can write specifically here that through his anthropogeography, Ratzel tried to demonstrate synthesis in geography. Synthesis in geography. And if you talk about synthesis in geography, here what happened? He showed that physical and human geography are united by approach and methodology. ठीक है? So that is one thing. One very important contribution of his. He also gave concept of organic state. Concept of organic state. And what was this concept of organic state? If any state is to survive, it has to grow in the Lebensraum, that is the living space, by feeding upon the neighboring states. So another contribution of his was the concept of organic state. Organic state. And if you talk about organic state, essentially in this what he did, he compared state with a living organism. ठीक है, living organism. I am coming to all those things. Wait, compared state with a living organism. And if you talk about this state with a living organism, here it means what? That like living organism, needs food for survival. Similarly, state also needs resources for survival and growth. Resources for the survival and growth. ठीक है. So basically what happens, once the state's own resources are finished, what the state needs to do to survive? State needs to feed upon other weaker states, or take the resources of other weaker state. Yes, state is political entity. Country, state here means country. So state needs to feed upon other weaker states. ठीक है. So tell me, can I say that here he is essentially trying to justify the process of colonization? Yes or no? Colonization was the same process which was ongoing. So he was essentially trying to justify this process of colonization. ठीक है. And we will see that his ideas of organic state had huge impact on Hitler. ठीक है. Hitler came later to Ratzel. Ratzel time period is around this 1880s 90s का period है Ratzel का. That was his academic time period. So after him came ultimately Hitler came, and Hitler was so much influenced by his ideas. He tried to apply the same idea to the Europeans of organic state and the Lebensraum. So feed upon the neighboring state, and in the Lebensraum. So Lebensraum क्या था? It is the area, that is the living space, that is the world which was there. So it is literally, it means living space. ठीक है. So that is basically the idea of Ratzel. And in fact you can understand that if you talk about, as we said, Spencer की अभी हमने बात की थी. Herbert Spencer was so much motivated by the ideas of Ratzel. So it was actually Herbert Spencer who ultimately talked about the survival of fittest theory. सुना होगा सबने, survival of the fittest theory. So he further elaborated these ideas of Ratzel, and there came the survival of the fittest concept. So it was Herbert Spencer who gave this conception of survival of fittest. ठीक है. So this is very important aspect of Ratzel. Okay, so this approach which Ratzel propounded, this approach is referred to as political ecology approach. This is referred to as the political ecology approach. Okay, so you can see that how he was trying to show that science can also be applied where? In human geography aspects. But we have to remember that his main contribution, one of very important contribution, was basically he is associated with what we call it as the scientific determinism. Very important aspect of his scientific determinism was that although it was determinism, that it was not too rigid. It was not too much rigid. And why we are saying that it was not too much rigid? Because in his writings, he always left a scope for the human enterprise. So his writing was just suggestive rather than authoritative. In other words, what we are saying, his writing were more suggestive than affirmative, fully affirmative. If I just have to give example, you understand this. For example, I give you two statements and you tell me where is greater possibility. So we can say that harsh physiography generally gives rise to less developed cultures. Second statement, harsh physiography produces underdeveloped cultures. Tell me which of these leaves a scope for possibilism, statement A or statement B? Which of these leaves the scope of possibilism? Very clearly, it is the statement A which leaves a scope for possibilism. Here he is saying generally gives rise. That means it is not always. Now, can you understand why here we talked about that in volume 2 his approach was deterministic, but he still leaves scope of possibilism. Okay? So this type of writing he has done where? He has done this type of writing is essentially in volume 2. You will be finding such writing is present in volume 2, and this is what which motivated the likes of if you talk about Vidal de Lablache. Okay? So we would always associate Ratzel with what? Ratzel with this type of writing, where it is the writing is more suggestive rather than fully affirmative. ठीक है, सो विडाल के बारे में समझ में आ गया, एंड विडाल इज अ वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट पर्सन, सो यू हैव टू रिमेंबर हिम. देन कम्स आवर नेक्स्ट, एंड अगेन यहां पर भी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, दिस पर्सन ऑल्सो इज वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. ठीक है, and it was whom? It was Alfred Hettner. And if you talk about Hettner, by the time he arrived in Germany, there was already what? Systematic tradition following Ratzel. So Ratzel was a very very influential person, and because of his influence, Germany had started to follow more of what? Systematic tradition. He developed systematic geography, and but what happened? Hettner ultimately changed this tradition and developed what? He developed the chorological approach. ठीक है, so first time the person who talked about chorology was who? It was Richthofen who first time talked about chorology. But who developed chorology? It was Hettner who developed chorology. ठीक है. In fact, you can see he was critical of Richthofen. He criticized Richthofen. Why he was critical of Richthofen? Because he believed that Richthofen failed to develop chorological studies. He was of the view, like before Ratzel came, Richthofen very clearly identified that regional approach should be the core of geography. And he identified that there should be chorography. First step is chorography, then there is chorology. But he did not himself demonstrate chorology. He didn't write much of chorological studies. Like he could have taken a particular area and done a chorology for that area, but he didn't develop that chorology. Okay? And that is why Hettner felt that this was the reason why there was dominance of systematic geography over the regional geography, and that is why he was critical of Richthofen. ठीक है, so are we clear why he was critical of Richthofen? Because he felt कि एक काम दिया गया था वो भी नहीं कर पाए. So what he did, he himself attempted to develop the concept of chorology, works related with chorology concept. So Hettner modified the concept of exceptionalism, that history and geography differ as one studies phenomena in time while other in space respectively. ठीक है, so he was the person who also followed this exceptionalism, that history and geography are a exceptional discipline, but he modified it in a different way. So he said that geographical studies cut across time. In chorology, it is not only the study of space, but it is also history of a place. So when you are doing chorology of a particular area, you also have to study the history of that area. Without understanding the history, you won't be able to understand the present characteristic of the region. ठीक है, so let us little bit talk about Alfred Hettner. So one important feature of Hettner is what we are saying, he modified exceptionalism. He modified exceptionalism. And what was the modification he did? He basically felt that geography also includes study of history. Of a place. History of a place. Okay. So I have given you example. For example, अगर याद हो, अगर हम उस example को recall करें, Do you remember we gave the example of northwest India, like the areas of Punjab, Haryana, and what was the thing we saw here in this region? They were characterized by very low sex ratio. Do you remember this example? Very low sex ratio, and there is preference for the male child. Yes. So why there is preference for the male child? Because this area, if you look into, one of the reasons is historically, if we look, this area was under attack frequently by invaders, which came from where? These invaders came from the west and northwest. So these invaders coming from west. So it was frequently under attack, and clearly so much atrocities on women, etc. So here the conditions were more harsh of living for women. Thus it was, people better felt that it was better that if we have male child, because male child will also help during the attack and he would be less prone to such type of things, okay, such type of problems. So again, see, if you don't understand the history of that particular area, very clearly you won't be able to appreciate why and how such type of features are found. Okay, are we clear? For example, you take another, if you talk about India and if you take Hinduism, okay, if we take Hinduism, so in Hinduism, you know very well that religiously we are not allowed to eat meat, particularly beef. Yes or no? Eating beef is considered as a taboo in our culture. And from where this comes, from where this develops? So actually, if you look back into history, you will go back to history and you will find that this culture was essentially, this culture of Hinduism was essentially developed by the Aryans, which were essential migrants which settled in case of India. And as they settled in the northern plains, they found they were basically what? They were cattle herders. They were pastoralist communities. And as they settled, this area was very, very fertile. And they also started practicing some agriculture. But very important thing was here, there was lack of food was not the problem in this area. So basically what happened, their population began to grow at very, very fast pace. And population became so much high, and if you look into the early Vedic period, the Hindus, which we call us as Hindus, we used to actually eat beef. There are so many evidences of that. However, later it was prohibited, because as the population grew, demand for beef became manifolds. And because if you talk about the cattle was still a very, very precious commodity for the Aryans, they ultimately felt that if the pace of the consumption of beef continues like this, we will be left without. Okay, we will be essentially left without cattle. There will be scarcity of cattle. Thus, in the religion itself, because you can understand at that time when people were less educated, one of the most powerful motivators was what? It was religion. So it was ultimately put into the religion that you don't have to eat beef, because God have told that you don't have to eat beef, because cow is basically what? It is a divine animal. So that is one way through which we ultimately became more vegetarian in characteristics. ठीक है. And you know बाकी चीज़ों में you know very well, one of the most voracious eaters of other meat items like chicken, mutton are Hindu people, you know very well. So it only this type of prohibition is basically related with what? It is more related with beef, that is the cattle. Okay. So again, see, you won't be able to appreciate fully the present characteristics of an area till you also understand the history of the area, why this kind of features developed, how these kind of features ultimately developed. ठीक है. So can we understand what Hettner here is talking about? Yes or no? Tell me. Another thing which we can talk about Hettner was he is associated with chorology, development of chorology. So he is the person who developed chorology, and we will see that in Hettner's chorology, it was basically what? It was science of regions. Science of regions. We will later see that Hettner was very clear in his ideas that both regional and systematic geography are important. He was very clear. Without development of systematic branch, chorology cannot be developed. ऑलरेडी मैंने इसको एक्सप्लेन किया इस पॉइंट को. I have already explained this, why chorology cannot be developed, because you will interrelate two aspects on the basis of some principle, some law, some concept. So he was very clear that both are what? Both are mutually supportive of each other. What you do, you basically you develop some laws in systematic geography, then you test those laws in regional geography and improve upon those laws. ठीक है. So both are mutually beneficial to each other. He was very very clear. Although we will say that later वो बाहर वाला आकर के those things happened and they were more like लड़ाई लगवा दी. They started a kind of dichotomous tendencies and said that see, Hettner never talked about systematic geography. Hettner was like only favoring regional geography, but he was not. He felt, because chorology was important, because that was the unique thing. Study of regions is unique thing related with geography. Here space becomes the main framework. In fact, you see here how he integrates historical studies as well. ठीक है. So that was the idea of chorology. However, there was one weakness in this, and what was this weakness? And this very important weakness was that it was very rigid. ठीक है. So it was very rigid. Here it means chorology of Hettner was very rigid. And how it was very rigid? First, there was fixed set of geographical variables on which the data was to be collected, data or information was to be collected. ठीक है, and this fixed variables were also, sequence was also rigid in them. So sequence was also rigid, like for example physiography. So within physiography, topography, climate, drainage, flora, fauna, so fixed set of variable. Similarly, other set of variable like the human variables. So in human variables like if you talk about the resource base of the area, if you talk about the primary sector industries which were there, secondary sector, tertiary sector. Okay, so likewise others, like for example another variable can be cultural human का aspect होगा, it is more economic, you can better here write economic aspects. So cultural variables like for example language, religion, okay, other cultural practices, so many of them. So देखो set of variables बहुत clear थे. And what was the methodology of chorology? It was simple. First, for example, suppose I first take an area where it is something like this. So this is plateau, this is plains, or suppose this is not plains, this is mountains, and this is your plains. ठीक है, so this is what, this is the first map of I have taken of topography. अब दूसरा एक मैप उठा लिया, and this map was again the same area. In this map there is different type of climates to be found. So humid, tropical, here is basically it is, और इसको ऐसे लिखो, suppose this is desert or arid, this is semi arid, here basically it is your humid tropical, this is basically subtropical. ठीक है, नाउ तो ये सेकेंड हो गया. अब इसमें सिमिलैरिटीज देखा, लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल कैन आई से, नाउ टेल मी, कैन आई आइडेंटिफाई नाउ दिस एरिया as one, this is subtropical plains, yes or no? Can I say this is basically humid tropical plains? This is this area, another region I can identify, and this area is what? This is your semi arid plateau, semi arid plains. This area will become what? This is semi arid plateau. This part, this another region we are getting here, this is your, ये क्या है, subtropical plateau, subtropical plateau. ठीक है, can you see this is arid plateau? Yes or no? So, how many regions here we are getting? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes or no? Can I now identify here 7 type of regions? Can you understand the chorology approach of Hettner now? And here we are just taking 2 variables. There was a sequence of variables, so many variables, and I keep on taking maps and keep on superimposing those maps over this. Okay? And accordingly, I can identify more number of regions which would have their unique characteristics with boundaries as well. Okay? Are we clear about this? So tell me, can I say this is a very rigid and exhaustive approach? Can we say that this approach looks very rigid and exhaustive? कह सकते हैं? And we will see that such rigidity was not very good for development of regional approach, and we will find that such rigidity proved counterproductive for development of regional approach and chorology. ठीक है? What actually used to happen, you can understand so many things. You have to collect first of all information. You have to first describe them, collect information about all those variables, and then you will ultimately combine these, and very complicated method. So what actually used to happen, most of the geographers started their academic career and started to regional geographer, they started their academic career and started with chorography. By the time they would have collected all this information and systematized everything, it was their retirement period. बूढ़े हो जाते थे. As a result, what happened? The development of chorology could not take place. Hettner, you can understand, he was criticizing Richthofen for he not being able to develop chorology, but he himself suggested a method of chorology which was so much difficult to achieve that chorology could not develop properly, and geography basically remained what? Descriptive discipline, encyclopedic discipline. ठीक है? तुम अभी भी देख लो, you see, if you look into most of the Indian geography books, majority of the regional geography, not only Indian geography, most of the regional geography books, tell me, don't you think that most of these books are just description of the phenomena? Yes or no? Most of these were essentially description of the phenomena. ठीक है? So that is basically about Hettner's approach. One more thing that you should know about Hettner's approach was that Hettner was influenced by Vidal. He was influenced by Vidal, Vidal was simultaneously parallelly developing his work in, if you talk about France, so he was influenced by Vidal de Lablache. So there was a definite humanistic tradition in the works of Hettner. ठीक है, सो आर वी क्लियर? दैट इज बेसिकली हेटनर. अब नेक्स्ट आता है, एंड इफ यू टॉक अबाउट दिस नेक्स्ट पर्सन, इट इज ऑटो स्लूटर. Otto Schluter. And if you talk about Otto Schluter, he was contemporary of Hettner. That means they both of these were simultaneously present at the same time. So they were academicians at the same time. He was also what? He was also a regional geographer. ठीक है? And remember that we are talking about a time period which is late 80s, 90s and the first decade of 20th century. ठीक है? So this was the time period when both Hettner and Schluter was present. Schluter was present. ठीक है? And yes, Schluter is also very important. He is also very important. So, but his approach, so he was also what? Regional geographer. So tell me, can we say that before this period, what approach was dominant approach? Which approach was dominant? Can I say systematic approach following Ratzel was dominant. ठीक है, but with the coming of these two in Germany, which approach began to dominate? With the coming of these two, it was regional approach which began to dominate. ठीक है. Here Ka is saying that kindly go slow. This is slow यार. इससे slow, if I become more slow than this, then you people will be sleeping. So don't tell me to become more slow, because otherwise you can understand. Okay. So late 80s, 90s, this is the periods, and here we are now going to talk about Schluter. So tell me, what was the weakness of regional approach we found? Weakness was what? It was very rigid and exhaustive of chorology. This was the weakness of chorology which we found. And even before this weakness was to come to fruition, become reality, Schluter was the person who very clearly could see that this approach is more theoretical and less practical approach. And thus what he did, he suggested that there can be alternative approach which can be adopted. ठीक है, alternative approach should be adopted, which is less rigid. So what he found? He found Hettner's chorological approach to be very rigid, and thus what he did, he suggested an alternative approach of regional geography for regionalization, identification of regions. Regionalization is what? It is identification of regions. ठीक है. So that is very important contribution of Schluter. And what was this approach? This alternative approach, he simply said कि what, rather than you try to find the boundary, regionalization is what? Finding the boundary of these areas. So you see here what we were doing, we were finding the boundaries of these areas. These were the various boundaries which we found, and as we keep on adding criteria, more boundaries would be emerging. So the final boundary was to be arrived in chorology at what? After all the interrelationship has been done. And this was a very, very difficult approach. So what Schluter suggested कि फालतू में इतना मेहनत करने की क्या जरूरत है? It is something like that. Suppose if you have to study, you feel like कि perspectives in human geography is very difficult. Let me study it very, very purely and become very good in this subject. So what you need to do? You need to study all the 3 books which we talked about. कौन सी थी? Majid Hussain. You start with Majid Hussain. You ultimately next you complete it with Dikshit, and then you ultimately go through Sudipta Adhikari for more depth of the concepts, and still you will feel that अभी और भी कुछ books हैं. So you go for Jensen, you go for Johnson, बहुत सारी books लिखी गई हैं. So you try to study those books, and finally what will happen? You will come to realization that age and attempts are over. Can you relate what I am saying? Age and attempts are over, and rest of the geography is fully left. So वही हो रहा था geographers के साथ. Most of their time was done academic. If you talk about career, was spent in doing chorography, and when the time of chorology came, they already retired. So chorology could not be developed. So like in our case, there is another solution. There is already a person who has done that, and this is me. So better, there is already existing notes which compile, synthesize all these books and various other sources, and also some more understanding, interrelationship of the understandings which have developed, and that is guidance notes. ठीक है? So same thing was ultimately suggested by Schluter, and he said that rather than you identifying the boundaries through this exhaustive process, what you need to do, you need to ultimately take the already existing boundaries which are provided by nature. Nature already provides boundaries. There are already present physical boundaries. And once you have identified one region on the basis of these physical boundaries, then you see that how with time a natural landscape which would have been present, which he calls it as Erland shaft, converts to a cultural landscape, or he calls it as the culture landscape. ठीक है. So suppose there is a nascent area, a very natural area, and humans enter there. They begin to use their culture, modify this area over a period of time. Maybe they started with agriculturalists, later they developed industries, later ultimately they developed for more technological aspects. So with that, what will happen? Transformation of the area would be taking place into a cultural landscape. ठीक है. So he suggested that what you have to do, that what was his idea, that identify the already present natural regions with clear boundaries as a framework. So you take that framework, then what you do, then once you have identified these, so first step is what? That is identification of what he calls it as land shaft. Now once you have identified this land shaft, you try to go back in history and try to find out how this land shaft would have been converted to the present form, the cultural land shaft. Okay, so here what is happening, this land shaft, there is application of what he calls it as culture. So in Germany, culture is culture. So there is application of culture, and thus it has today become culture land shaft, cultural landscape. ठीक है, cultural landscape. So he found that this was a more feasible way of studying the areas rather than the rigid way of Hittner. ठीक है, are we clear about this? Tell me. So this is the main work of Otto Schluter. Very clearly, this is the main work of Otto Schluter. Boundaries here means physiography. Boundary का मतलब है boundary यार. Here we are talking about what? In this aren't we here drawing the boundaries of this area? Yes or no? So you identify the boundaries. Yes, he was of the view that the most clear land shaft is that which would be based upon physiography. So this is basically, boundaries here are based upon physiography. That means his Erland shaft was basically what? Physiographic regions. It was essentially physiographic regions. Like हम इंडिया को physiographic regions में divide कर सकते हैं. You know, basically at very broad level we can divide India into the Himalayas, the plains, the plateau. We can further go in detail, Western Himalayas, Eastern Himalayas, Purvanchal region. ठीक है, yes, coastal lands separately you can do. So that is basically what was his idea, that nature has already given you boundaries. And cultures, in case of cultures, there is these boundaries, physical boundaries always behave as barriers to spread of cultures. Thus, when there is boundary on both the sides of boundary, what happens? A different type of cultural landscape develops. Okay? Are we clear about this point? So this is basically the work of Otto Schluter. So these are the most important geographers related with German school of thought. Okay? Now next comes the French school of thought. French school of thought. So unlike the German school, French school can be clearly associated with development of possibilism and greater focus towards human geography. Moreover, majority of French scholars, mainly after emergence of Vidal, were also regional geographers. So here regional geography tradition was comparatively more developed, particularly after Vidal. And before Vidal, there were number of people who had their own influence. You see, number of names are given, like Montesquieu was one of the scholars who had his own influence. So he discussed man-nature relationship. You know, French school, there is one very important thing about French school, that French school was always, the French scholars were very much associated with the ideas of, democracy, the ideas of people oriented ideas. Okay, French was in fact birthplace of many of these ideas following French Revolution. You must have heard about this in world history. पढ़ा है? Yes or no? So it was an idea where it was a place where people thought about various possibilities which could become true. And the culture of this type of culture of France essentially also influenced. Yes, Montesquieu polity में भी आता है. Very correct. It also influenced the geographical thoughts. So already in France, actually there was a kind of possibilistic tradition where human beings were given some at least weightage. So he discussed man-nature relationship and emphasized that human activities are controlled by environment in which they reside. That means there is no doubt that environment is playing dominant role in what we do. Like for example, right now I am wearing this shirt. Okay? I am wearing this shirt and AC is on here. Tell me, I am sitting in Delhi, which has a kind of subtropical climate. What would be my dress up in the month of January? And while you answer, remember that I am bechara male, not female. Females are more strong. Okay? So very clearly I will be wearing more warm thermals, basically sweater, etc., or jacket or something like that. So he was very clear in his approach that there is no doubt that environment affects human activities. Despite this emphasis, he was also aware that alterations can be done in the environment through development of civilizations. So as civilization develops, what will happen? There can be some alterations which can be done, which was already done. For example, with agricultural revolution, what we did? We left many of the ways of our living. Now we could live more settled life with agricultural revolution. Before we were nomadic herders. So he could very clearly see that there were possibilities which could be realized as we continue to develop the civilizations. Okay? So tell me, Montesquieu ideas, can I say they were more of a kind of balance in relationship between human environment? Yes or no? They were very clearly in a kind of balance between human and environment. Then another person was Comte de Buffon, and he also discussed man nature relationship, but emphasized that change on the face of the earth was a result of human actions. He insisted that humans could adjust to any climate depending upon their ability to adapt. You can understand, he speculated on climate change. उस समय climate change की बात कर रहा था. That time he was talking about climate change. We are talking about 18th century, 19th century. They were talking already about climate change, and suggested that removal of forests and alteration of drainage of the marshes might lead to increase in temperature. Global warming, देखो, he was already talking about global warming, and here there are leaders of great nations who basically still don't accept that there is climate change. So one leader talks about that there is no climate change. He totally denies there is climate change taking place. There is other leader who says कि climate नहीं, हम बदल रहे हैं, we are changing. ठीक है. Here there is a mistake and you have to remove this mistake here. So यहाँ पे stop कर दो. Comte de Buffon. Here you stop. Actually this has by mistake come here. This is the philosophy of positivism. Actually it was not this Comte de Buffon. It is Auguste Comte. Auguste Comte. ठीक है. So please make this correction. This is not Comte de Buffon, it is Auguste Comte. बाद में देखेंगे. Philosophy of positivism. ठीक है. So very clearly what I'll do, I'll just cut it. This is not part of here. Who is the second leader? It is my guess. You can also guess who is that second leader. Very great person. Okay, Philippe Bosch. And if you talk about Philippe Bosch, he started the trend of Rhine geography. That is pure geography. So ये term याद रखना है. This can be asked as a short note in exam. Rhine geography or pure geography. And what was this basic idea of pure geography or Rhine geography? At that time, geographers started to believe that regions are actually reality. Regions actually exist on earth. Later we will see that there are two ideas about regions. One idea on regions says, which is we call it as the objective approach of regions. Second approach is subjective approach. So one approach of regions says that regions are real entities, like they are real, something which is very real, really present. Subjective approach says that regions are not real, they are just way of looking at the phenomena. They are tool of classification, like in science there is classification of phenomena is done. Same thing in geography, there is a tool whereby we classify space. So you know, जैसे हमने याद है हमने देखा था, we were talking about waves, oceanic waves. Do you remember that? Yes or no? We talked about oceanic waves. In oceanic waves, did you remember that we talked about variety of classifications of the waves? On the basis of producing force, on the basis of resistive force, on the basis of the nature of wave propagation. So did you see that as my criteria was changing, the wave classification was also changing. ठीक है. So same thing was applied in geography and it was said in the subjective view. इसको मैं बाद में और elaborate करूंगा, don't worry for this, just I am here giving a glimpse of that. So in subjective view it was talked about that regions are basically what? They are not real, they are mental frameworks. So regionalization is essentially a tool of classification of space. So like in classification, as the criteria of classification changes, the classification itself would change. Same thing in regionalization, as the criteria of classification changes, what we will be finding? We will be finding that the classification itself would be changing. If I just give one example, suppose I am talking about South India. So, you know, there is Tamil Nadu, there is Kerala, there is here Karnataka, there is your there is here your Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, this is Karnataka, this is Kerala, this is Tamil Nadu. Okay, so these are there. So can I say here I am basically, if I am dividing this is on the basis of what? Tell me. इसको in fact मैं हटा ही देता हूँ. Can I say this which I have done here, this division? Can I say here the basis of division is, basis or criteria of this division is language? Yes or no? Tell me. Language is the main basis of this division. Now tell me, if I choose another criteria. So if I choose the criteria to be topography, tell me, can I say I will find this is Malnad, this is Maidan? Can I say here I will find this is now Telangana, this is Rayalaseema, this is coastal Andhra Pradesh, this is the Coromandel coast or the coastal Tamil Nadu, this is basically here we will be finding that there would be more related with eastern Ghats or Tamil Nadu plateau, you can basically say. Here there is an area which would be the western Ghats, this is coastal Kerala. Yes or no? So can you see that here as the criteria changes, does the boundaries of the region change? Boundaries of the region is also changing. Okay? So this type of viewpoint we later see, this is basically what? Subjective view of region. Subjective view of region, and clearly subjective view of region, later on it developed with Hettner and all those. But before subjective view there was an objective view of regions. And objective view of regions simply क्या कहता है? It says that there is actually presence of regions. Regions are present in reality. ठीक है? They are actually present in reality. So for example, if I suppose go by aeroplane or helicopter over India, tell me, can I actually really, if I try to look from a more macro point of view, can I actually identify that these regions which I have drawn, they do have some uniformity of characteristics? Tell me. Yes or no? Will I find some uniformity of characteristic? Like if I go in coastal Andhra, there would be some kind of similar landscape. and this landscape would be more or less demarcated from the Telangana plateau. Yes or no? Okay. So this type of viewpoint is basically what? This type of viewpoint is the objective view of the regions. ठीक है. So बाद में देखेंगे that we cannot say that objective view is wrong. Later we will see. It also has some element of truth in it. But this type of view is objective view, and from where this type of view emerges? This type of view emerges from this geography, which is Rhine geography. And Rhine geography was basically what? It developed in France and Germany, and it postulated that Earth was divided into drainage basins by mountain ranges, which even continued into the oceans. They continued into the oceans. Okay? The Earth's surface could be divisible into naturally defined compartments. Okay? Boundary is the key of any region. You cannot identify any region without boundaries. Okay? Here the basis is some physical criteria. So thus Earth's surface could be divisible into naturally defined compartments. Thus he was of the view that drainage basins are best kind of natural regions. Okay? So you know very well. For example, if I talk about here, suppose there is this area which is present and there is a mountain range, what we call it as the water divide. So we know from this water divide there is drainage which is flowing here. So can I say this area would have one type of characteristic? There is more common that A would develop its own unique characteristics, B would develop its own unique characteristics. Yes or no? So Bosch was of the view that these mountains, they are basically behaving as what? Water divides. And as these water divides, what they do? They divide the earth or the land into drainage basins, and drainage basins are already given regions. Okay? And this is essentially identification of such regions is it was referred to as the Rhine geography or pure geography. Why pure geography? Because these are pure regions, natural regions which are present. So tell me, if I have to associate Hettner and Schluter, Hettner's idea was which of the region idea? Hettner's view was objective or subjective? Yes, like India and China, Albin. So Hettner's view were objective or subjective? Hettner's view was subjective view of the region. Can I say Schluter's view was objective view of the regions? He was identifying already given regions, already given areas. So Schluter's view of regionalization was more oriented with respect to the objective view. Yes or no? But this trend of the objective view, actually it started with the Rhine geography. Okay? So here there is one note. Before Vidal, there were several geographers who developed deterministic theme in French geography, as they were influenced by the German school. So some of them you see, like these people, Friedrich Leple, and he introduced deterministic paradigm while studying human families. He identified three main type of families which developed under distinct environmental conditions. Asiatic steppe was home of stable nomadic lives families under control of patriarchs, a particularistic family which was present in the maritime shores of Europe. Unstable family was characteristic of forest, also urban environment of Europe and America. Okay, so here he is very clearly talking about how climate is affecting the family, the type of family which is found. Similarly, there was another Edmund de Molins, and he found that the primary and decisive cause of diversity of people and races was route followed by them during the ancient dispersal episodes. According to him, environment rigidly controls, very clearly see, rigidly controls structure and development of population. He was a hardcore environmental determinist. So he was there. So ये दो नाम याद रखना, because sometimes you have to show that in French school also there were people who were deterministic oriented. ठीक है. So in geography there has always been what? There has always been diversity. Can you understand? Yes or no? But it is very clear that here you see this, read this aspect, you will understand that with the emergence of Vidal, whole of the French geography changed. His influence was so paramount that when he died, all the heads of French universities were disciples of Vidal. Later on, the criticism of QR was based possibilism, which means humans have lot of possibilities and could display variabilities of behavioral traits. So much was his influence in the French geography that after his death, almost all the heads of French universities were his disciples. ठीक है. So तुम लोग मेरा इशारा समझ रहे होगे, where I am trying to point out. A day should come when all geography selections in civil services should be from where? Should be my students. We are very near to that point. If we put a little bit more effort, probably we will achieve that. Okay. So hopefully all of you agree with this. So that was the so much decisive influence of Vidal de Lablache. So he was influenced by writings of Ritter, volume 2 of Anthropogeography of Ratzel, while he had definite humanistic influences of Montesquieu and Comte de Buffon. Okay, they had huge influence on him. So what he did, he tried to establish geography as a distinct discipline and recognized that geographical studies had core theme of study, that is man-nature relationship or human-environment relationship. QR represents here, Poonam is asking what is QR in the previous one. QR represents quantitative revolution. So we will see quantitative revolution. पहले बताया है, I have told about quantitative revolution in the initial classes. Okay. So he tried to establish geography as distinct discipline and recognized that geographical studies had a core theme of study of human environment relationship. He emphasized to focus attention on this relationship and himself exemplified this by focusing his attention on study of homogeneous areas referred to as pays. Pays were basically what? River valleys in France. So pays were essentially regions and they represented river valleys in France. Now if they were regions which represented river valleys in France, tell me, Vidal's view of region was objective or subjective. You will classify Vidal's view of regions into the objective category or the subjective category. It would essentially be under objective category. Okay? So these pays were natural regions. It was similar to the Rhine geography of Bosch and also to the German concept of the Landerschaft. In each of these pays, interaction between environment and humans has led to development of distinct cultures, and these distinct cultures he called them as genere divai. ये दो terms बहुत important हैं. Vidal is a very important geographer that we have to remember because we have to later study about possibilism. So genere divai. ठीक है. So what he was essentially talking about, if you talk about the influence of, if we talk about Vidal de la Blache, so very importantly, Vidal de la Blache, he was basically what? He adopted the regional approach. And as we said, he was of the towards objective view of regions. Thus what he did, he identified pays. Okay? And if you talk about these pays, he was of the view that they are very complexly interrelated with the genere divai of an area, or genere divai is basically what? It is the culture of that particular area. Okay? So there is a complex relationship. This is a very complex relationship between pays and genere divai. Okay? And this complex relationship is such that you cannot say that which came first. Pays is essentially what? Pays by here means, he means the physical aspects of the area, and genere divai is essentially the cultural aspects of the area. Some similarities, not exactly, yes, some similarities, Jubilee. So physical aspects and the cultural aspects. Okay? Genere divai is essentially what? It is way of living, that is culture. So he is of the opinion that these are so much complexly interrelated with each other that you cannot say that which is the cause and which is the effect. Okay? So it is so much complex relationship that it is difficult to understand that which is the cause and which is the effect. It is something like, you must have heard about that phrase, which came first? First either hen came or the egg. अंडा पहले आया या मुर्गी. So it is something like that. It is so much complex relationship. ठीक है? Now, what he was of the opinion that under determinism, this complex relationship is studied in highly simplistic manner using cause effect relationship, using the cause effect relationship. So, you know very well what is the cause. Cause becomes the environment and effect becomes the culture. Cause effect relationship. So, he was of the view that it is too simplistic. It is too simplistic to bring out the proper understanding of this relationship. Thus, we can say Vidal was totally against the rigid views of determinism or environmental determinism. Instead, what he did, as a reaction to such rigid views, what he did, he developed his own concept of possibilism. समझ में आ गया? Yes or no? Possibilism. Very importantly, later हम देखेंगे that his possibilism was what? If he is criticizing someone, suppose if he is criticizing determinism for being too rigid, being too strict, that it is saying that only one way relationship is there. And if he develops his own possibilism where he again is saying only one way, and he begins to say that no, human controls everything. Tell me, will he not contradict himself? Will he contradict himself? If he says in his possibilism that human is controlling everything, yes, he will become self-contradictory. And Vidal is much more intelligent than that. So tell me, his possibilism will be more balanced view of human environment relationship or more extreme view on human environment relationship? Will it be more towards the middle of that continuum हमने देखा था, if you remember, determinism and voluntarism, or it would be more near to voluntarism? We'll see that his possibilism was more balanced one. ठीक है. सो याद है हमने बात किया था कि दो अपोजिट फिलॉसफीज हैं. देयर इज वन इज डिटर्मिनिज्म and the one is at the opposite end is voluntarism. So if there is a middle point, I would keep here, this is the point of Vidal's possibilism. ठीक है, this is where the Vidal's possibilism would be kept. Then so according to him, neither humans nor nature was subordinated to each other, because such subordination would disturb the very synthesis of existence. Thus, he criticized the concept of environmental determinism, which was inherited from Darwin, and postulated his own concept of possibilism. He treated possibilism within the framework of scientific studies and pronounced that nature sets limits and offers possibilities to human settlements. But the way humans avail these possibilities depend upon their own generative eye or the cultural tools. ठीक है. So what nature is doing? Nature gives us a range of possibilities, and depending upon our own development, cultural, technological development, we will be able to use these opportunities. ठीक है. So for example, let us see that if I talk about desert and if I talk about a river plain, floodplains of river, tell me which of these from the perspective of human habitation gives more range of opportunities. The perspective we are taking is human habitation. Which of these is giving more range of opportunities? Obviously, it is the river plains. They are giving more range of opportunities. So, can I say, if I compare, this is desert, this is river plains, can I say in desert I can say the carrying capacity is here, in river plains the carrying capacity would be like this? Yes or no? So, very clearly river plains is giving range of possibilities. So, what Vidal is saying, that nature gives us range of possibilities, and depending upon our own technological and cultural tools, we will be able to use or choose from these opportunities. Okay. So, tell me, in his concept, can we see that there is a balance? Can we see that there is a balance between human and environment? He is not saying that everywhere there is so much opportunities that you can do anything you want. He is not saying this. He is simply saying that nature offers range of opportunities. बात समझ में आ गई? So his view was very clearly what? His view is very clearly a balanced view on human environment. ठीक है? Thus Vidal pointed out that humans establish their relationship with environment not as individuals but through heritage and culture of the group to which they belong. With his emphasis on study of culture, he also encouraged the development of historical tradition in French geography. Concept of possibilism given by Vidal was popularized by his friend Lucien Febvre. In fact, Febvre was the person who coined this term possibilism. Possibilism. ठीक है? So we will see Lucien Febvre, another very important name that we have to remember. So Lucien Febvre की बात करें तो very importantly he was essentially a historian. He was essentially a historian. And historian का मतलब क्या हुआ? Can I say he is that पड़ोसी, neighbor who creates problems in the family? Yes or no? Outsider in geography? Tell me. याद है वो स्टोरी हमारी डाइकोटॉमी डुअलिज्म पे? So he is like that outsider, that वो पड़ोसी who creates trouble in the family. He is essentially what? An outsider. He is not a geographer. So his views are not balanced. He was the historian who supported the idea of possibilism of Vidal and in fact coined the term possibilism. He coined a very famous phrase, and you read this phrase: there are no necessities but everywhere possibilities. Can you see what he has done in this statement? What do you feel he has done in this statement? There are no necessities but everywhere possibilities. क्या किया उसने इसमें? ओके, ओवर कॉन्फिडेंट, नो डाउट. Yes, as Nitin rightly says, he has moved possibilism more towards voluntarism. He has moved it more towards voluntarism. Okay, there was a slight, I think, disconnection in the stream which was there. 1-2 सेकेंड का हुआ था. Am I visible now to all of you? Okay. So very clearly he is doing what here? He is essentially, can I say, he gives a position, a more extreme position to possibilism. He provides a more, he develops a more extreme position on possibilism. ठीक है? That is why we say always that any post should be based upon what? It should be more based upon merit rather than your relations or other things. जिसको हम हिंदी में we call it as भाई भतीजावाद. So what actually happens? Always and always the person who originally propounded the concept, when he was propounding that concept, he would have seen both the coins. He was the inventor of the concept, so he would have seen both the faces. And thus, always and always his ideas are what? His ideas are more balanced. Is the video stuck? It was working. I think it was, it stuck for few seconds earlier, but now it is working. Okay. So he gave a more extreme position. So I was talking about, that is the reason why you always say that position should be based upon merits, not on the relationships. Okay, so he was a very important friend of Vidal and he got too much popularity being very close to Vidal and he was taken very seriously, but he himself never developed possibilism. And he took possibilism, we'll later see, from more historical point of view. And thus he approached a more, you would say that, a more extreme form of possibilism, which was contradictory to basically the ideas of Vidal himself. Okay, so we'll see that. Another person that we have to remember in the French school, he was none other than Jean Brunhes. And he coined the term human geography. He was pupil of Vidal, who not only popularized his ideas in France but also spread them in other countries like Britain and United States. He tried to blend Vidalian tradition of genre de vie with Schluter's trend of culture Landschaft. He wrote a book, Geography Humane. So again, Jean Brunhes is also a very important person associated with the possibilism school. Okay, so that is another name you will be remembering. Geography Human, and he elaborated how systematic human geography needs to be developed and given a clear disciplinary basis. So what he is trying to simply suggest is that human geography can be developed systematically rather than just regionally. So in this, what he did, he categorized human activities into 3 branches. First, facts of unproductive occupation of soil. And here he elaborated on how humans altered the environment by building of houses, road, that means settlement geography, what we today study as population and settlement geography. Second was facts of plants and animal conquest. Here he showed that human ability to transform environment through activities like cultivation of plants and domestication of animals. So this was basically what? Your agricultural geography. This was more associated with population and settlement geography, which we today call it as. Facts of destructive exploitation, like activities of mineral exploitation industries. So this was more associated with the economic industrial geography. Okay. So according to him, human geography scope was threefold. There were three branches of human geography. Brunet's methodological considerations are more suggestive than definitive. His contribution was his detailed portraying of the concepts relating to human geography. While portraying his ideas of human geography, he also showed strong orientation towards regional geography, as he was influenced by Schluter's landscape morphology. According to him, visible landscape can be divided into regions, which are product of interplay of both natural conditions as well as the activities of the human beings. Thus, landscape of a region itself presents a synthesis. Can you see again he is trying to achieve a synthesis? यहाँ पर भी उसने क्या किया? He was talking here, this classification is what? More systematic. And he also is talking about what? Can you see regional approach? Regional geography. So he is again a geographer, and geographers always stand for synthesis. Synthesis where physical geography and human geography converge. Thus he professed a possibilistic theme and the idea of human geography which was more dualistic rather than dichotomous. Like Vidal, he also favored historical trend in the development of human geography. Okay? So if I have to remember some names from French school, तीन नाम बिल्कुल नहीं बोलना. And what are these three names? Vidal, Lucien Febvre and Jean Brunes. Okay? So these three names you should not forget, never forget. Another was E. Merton, not so much important, just let us see. He was one of the few French geographers who rose to prominence after Vidal, but concentrated on physical geography. Okay, so suppose you have to talk about that human, suppose a statement comes that French geography was essentially, the scope of French geography was essentially human geography. Suppose this question comes. Now tell me, can I say that it is not necessary? There were geographers who also focused upon physical geography, and very good example is E. Merton. So despite this fact, he belonged to the Vidalian tradition and expressed that physical geography was an essential part of geographical studies of an area. Geographical studies include studies of human geography as well, and thus essential concern of geography was achieving a synthesis. See again, he is also talking about synthesis. Thus, he was of the view that physical and human geography form essential branches of geographical studies. So, they are not dichotomous in nature as various others would have done later on. Okay? So, that is the one thing. Then comes the British school of thought. इसको भी देख लेते हैं what they say. So, I have already talked about that British school of thought was mostly associated with what? Development of regional geography and its emphasis on historical studies. In fact, it saw emergence of specialist regionalism. So, what is essentially specialist regionalism? It is a way of studying where a geographer, regional geographers would do what normally? They would study different regions and they would talk about the characteristics of those regions. But suppose if a geographer is present and he devotes his entire academic career in study and specialization of only one area, this type of regional geography is referred to as what? It is specialist regionalism or specialist regional approach. What would be the purpose? Why one person would devote his whole academic career to study of one area? Tell me. What could be the reason? कोई बता सकता है मुझे? The main reason would be, yes, he would be more concerned because with specialization what he would be able to do, he would be able to better understand the problems and prospects, yes, every detail of the region. And thus tell me, will he be able to become more solution oriented? Would he be able to develop more applied aspect of that area? ठीक है. So regional geography in Britain more developed as an applied regional approach. That is essentially the base of this specialist regionalism. ठीक है. So that is the core of British school of thought, and you can say that the father of British school of thought can be called as Hefford J. Mackinder. We have to study about one theory in political geography, models and theories में it is given. You must have seen the syllabus. What is the name of the theory? कोई बता सकता है? It is Heartland theory. ठीक है, it is Heartland theory. So we'll see that it is written here. You can see Heartland theory, very famous, and even today it explains many of the geopolitical phenomena which are taking place in the world. So he was basically what pioneer in the development of historical trend in British geography. And Rimland nahi hai, Rimland is different. It was Spikeman from US who developed Rimland. We will see later. And mainly developed the political theme. So basically he was what? He was a political geographer. In fact, he was of the view that history and geography represent time and space studies respectively and should never be separated. You cannot separate time and space. Okay? So thus you cannot separate geography from history. Same type of view was held by another person. What was his name? अभी थोड़ी देर पहले पढ़ा था हमने. What was the name of that person? Yes, very good Balveer. It was Hettner, Alfred Hettner. ठीक है. So that is one case. Mackinder, if you talk about, he was strongly influenced by Darwinian themes of struggle and natural selection, as well as the struggle and associated organization. Essentially, this means he would be possibilist or determinist in his approach. He would be possibilist or determinist. He would be essentially determinist. Okay? So you see here, Darwinian idea was so much pronounced, had so much pronounced impact on him that he stated that no rational geography can exist which is not built upon and subsequent to physical geography. Hardcore determinist, environmental determinist. You can see that there. Thus, he was essentially a determinist geographer. His most important contribution to geography was his spatial political model, which we call it as the Heartland theory. And we'll see later when I'll talk about Heartland theory, I'll show that how it was a deterministic idea. Okay. Then there were others, like one very important, another was George Chisholm. You can say that he resurrected Hettner's concept of chorology. And began the tradition of regional geography in Great Britain. Okay? But more important than him, this name you have to remember. So first name remember karna hai, and this name, this is important from us, Patrick Geddes. He started, actually he was the main person who popularized the regional theme, regional paradigm in British school of thought. He developed what he called himself as a regional variety, which embraced the study of triology of place, work and folk. According to him, geography should be an applied science which should state what ought to be and not what it is. I will come to that. So basically for him it was what? Place, work and folk. So place is the physical features of the area. Here place means what? The physical features of the area. Work here means the economic aspects, and folk here means the culture. Can you understand this? So it was all study of this triology. what is the physical characteristics, what is the economic characteristics, and what is the cultural characteristics of the area. So, when he was trying to identify regions, they were based upon these three characteristics. The regions were to be identified. Okay. But he was very clear that geography should become what? Geography should become an applied science, which should state what ought to be and not what it is. Okay. Not what it is. You remember and underline this. Okay. We will see that here we find that glimpses of which geography? Can I say welfare geography? In fact, radicalism can be seen. So, note down this. Here we find that in his ideas there is glimpses of welfare and geography and radicalism. In fact, you can understand that later on we will see that Smith, who was the propounder of welfare geography, he belonged to the British school of thought. Okay? British school of thought. And you tell me, can I say it is not coincidence? Influence of Patrick Geddes and others would have been there, which would have affected Smith, David Smith. Yes or no? Tell me. Thus, his regional geography may be referred to as regional specialization, where problem solving was inherent part of regional studies. Okay? So, that is one thing. Then another is Andrew J. Hurtbutson. ये भी नाम याद रख सकते हो, तो you try to remember. He was deterministic geographer who carried forward the regional trend in British geography. He introduced the term natural regions. ये बाद में देखेंगे. So, he divided the earth into natural regions and suggested that they should be identified on the basis of features like climate and vegetation. Like I can divide the world into natural regions. Like for example, tell me, can I divide the world into a tropical rainforest region? Yes or no? Tropical rainforest region. So, tropical rainforest region, it is a natural region. Monsoon region, it is what? It is a natural region. So, Hurtbutson divided the world into regions based on the physical criteria. Then Fleur, he introduced the concept of genre de vie and modes of livelihood in British geography. He offered regional classification of the world and assumed that all human activities are directed towards accomplishment of three functions: nutrition, reproduction and increase of well-being. Again you see, here what comes? Well-being. Can I say again the welfare? Glimpses of welfare approach. Can you see that? Tell me. Welfare approach. So, we will see that it was David Smith who developed the concept of welfare geography, and it is no coincidence that he belonged to the British school, because British school even before Smith had this tradition. So, he felt that first two were elementary and thus used the third criteria to increase of well-being as the basis of division of world into 7 regions. So, you see, he divided the world into these 7 regions: regions of hunger, regions of debilitation, which are lying on the periphery of hunger regions; regions of increment, where some development was taking place, more developing characteristics were found; regions of effort, tropical regions; regions of difficulty, mountainous desert regions, very much low well-being; regions of wandering, the steppe etc., pastoral nomads, steppe, savanna, the grassland areas; industrial regions, that was the western world where the well-being was very high. Okay. So, that was one person. Then there was L. Dudley Stamp, and if you talk about Dudley Stamp, he exemplified what had been earlier conceived as regional specialization by Patrick Geddes. He spent most of his academic career in study of British landscape. In 1930s, he provided land use classification map of Britain, which was based upon the potential land quality and potential land use. ठीक है. So Dudley stamp was a manifestation of the ideas of Giddey's. He can be referred to as a specialist or regional geographer, a specialist regional geographer. ठीक है. So this was essentially British school of thought. Can I continue for 15-20 minutes more? Tell me. Let us finish this. School of thoughts को finish कर लेते हैं, so that we would be able to start tomorrow the paradigms. ठीक है, थोड़ा बाउंस होगा, कोई बात नहीं है. बाद में सिलेबस बाउंस होने लगा प्रीलिम्स की तरफ, तो यू नो दैट विल बी मोर प्रॉब्लम. डू यू एग्री विथ मी और नॉट? Again, understand that if it bounces towards prelims, it will create more problem. So let us continue. It is going to just take few more minutes, 15 minutes maximum. I can understand ALS students का थोड़ा problem है, but we have to finish. So it was not a request. You can understand. I was just telling you, informing you. Okay. So the scene of geographical development shifted to landscape of America in 20th century. Unlike French and German school, American geography was influenced by simultaneously dominance of several paradigms, thus had explicit development of dichotomies and dualisms. पहले ही हमने देखा है. For example, it saw the rise of dichotomy between one dichotomy which was present, environmental determinism versus cultural determinism. Okay. Areal differentiation versus, actually इसमें थोड़ा सा उल्टा हो गया. I'll just write this. Here you write environmental determinism. इसको कट कर दो. You just cut this. I'll tell you what to write. Determinism versus possibilism. So this was first dichotomy. Later period, and this dichotomy was present during which period? It was present before First World War. ठीक है. Between the world wars, there was dichotomy which was present, dichotomy or dualism, that is areal differentiation versus cultural determinism. AD versus CD, that is areal differentiation versus cultural determinism. We'll see how they were dichotomous. ठीक है. So let us see, first part में there were several people who, some developed more oriented towards environmental determinism while others were oriented towards possibilism. So for example, J.K. Powell, he was essentially a physical geographer, more specifically a geomorphologist, who developed concepts like base level. Base level is what? Maximum depth up to which the river is able to erode, and which had strong influence on W.M. Davis. He also had an ecological viewpoint, and his observation led him to believe that only way to maintain flow of water into the river was to ensure that forest cover was preserved in the catchment area of the river. Catchment area of the river. So tell me, I would say that Powell had a more balanced view on human environment. Yes or no? Very clearly he is recognizing what? He is recognizing how humans can bring changes in the environment. ठीक है. So although being physical geographer, his ideas were more oriented towards a balance of view, more, you can say, possibilism. Then there was Louis Agassiz, and he identified Pleistocene epoch was influenced by several phases of glaciation and interglaciation. He mainly tried to develop the systematic branches of geography like climatology and geomorphology. So Louis Agassiz was a hardcore physical geographer and his ideas were more oriented towards determinism. Then there was G.K. Gilbert, again a determinist, and he was geomorphologist and systematic geographer. There was another Shaler, a systematic geographer influenced by Agassiz, but despite this he was at the same time influenced by the ideas of Comte de Buffon and attempted to elaborate humans' role in changing the face of the earth. So see, out of all these people we see that Powell had a little bit of possibilistic trend and Shaler also had a little bit of possibilistic. So he is possibilistic more towards possibilistic trend. These are more what? Determinist. Okay. We'll see W.M. Davis is also determinist. Very famous. पूरा का पूरा हमारा geomorphology is based upon whom? It is W.M. Davis. Okay. So he was a geomorphologist who preferred systematic geography very clearly. He developed the time substitution approach in American geography. So to be more specific, this time substitution approach क्या है? इसका पूरा full form होता है. This is essentially time space substitution approach. Time space substitution approach. And what is this time space substitution approach? Here time replaces the process. Time replaces process. In other words, time becomes process. Tell me, like for example, human beings में एक आध exceptions को छोड़ दो. If you just leave some exceptions like Anil Kapoor, like me. So if you just leave some of the exceptions which are there, can I say as time passes by, it is inevitable that people will become old? Yes or no? So here time is becoming what? The time becomes process. So this type of approach is time space substitution approach. So Davis developed the idea that as landforms become old, they would pass from youth to mature to ultimately old stage. Okay, so youth, Y means youth, to mature to ultimately old stage. Okay, so this type of approach we'll later see, it is what? Time space substitution approach. And he had actually adopted this approach from where? He was a big fanboy of Darwin. So Darwin had already developed this approach in geomorphology, that is marine geomorphology. When he was developing, बाद में हम उसको भी पढ़ेंगे, the subsidence theory of coral reef development. So he had already developed this evolutionary approach. This was based upon the approach of evolution of Darwin. Okay, so that is time space substitution approach. So he had developed this time space substitution approach. So this approach had already been developed by Darwin in his subsidence theory of coral reef formation. Davis used this approach in the study of landscape development. Means time substitutes the phenomena of process. Time itself becomes the process. Time substitution approach reflects the phenomena of determinism, where elapse of time inevitably implies change in form. Okay, there is a natural law which governs all the activity. So it is what? It is determinism. Davis' deterministic view became more manifested in his concept of ontography, which denotes organic half of geography. So see what happened. What is this ontography? You know, at that time in American School of Geography, Davis was the tallest figure of geography. He was the most tallest figure in geography, and I have told you before also. Why? Because physical geographers will be more given a better status than human geographers, because they are what? They represent something more scientific. So the status of physical geographers is always high. Same is the case of Davis. He was the tallest figure of that time. And being the tallest figure of geography, he was very clearly asked, what is the scope of geography? Okay. So Davis, what he said, that scope of geography is, first of all, for him, geography is basically what? Geography is essentially a systematic discipline. And this systematic discipline has two branches. And which are these two branches of this systematic discipline? One branch is where you study of physiography, and the second branch is study of ontography. So, physiography is basically what? It is similar to physical geography, where you have to study the features like topography, climate, drainage, and biogeography. Here it was essentially ontography is human geography. And for him, the scope of human geography was what? To understand how physiography controls human activities. How physiography controls human activities. Okay. So tell me, Davisian views about human environment relationship, were they possibilistic or deterministic? Very clearly deterministic. Okay. So organic half of geography seems to have acquired this concept from essentially Ritter. He believed that geography is in its modern phase is concerned with the national correlation of inorganic conditions and organic responses, how people are responding, how life is responding. Thus, according to Davis, geography was concerned with study of two branches, physiography and ontography. Okay. You tell me that if such a person comes and says, talks about geography being basically determinist, what type of impact it would have on his disciples, people who have studied from him? Can I say that it is possible that they would become hardcore determinists? Yes or no? It is very much possible that they would become hardcore determinists, and we will see that this is essentially true with this person, Ellsworth, Huntington and Ellen Semple. It is essentially true with these people. We will see. ठीक है, ठीक है, आज के लिए बंद करते हैं, because I think you people are tired like me. So we'll continue this tomorrow, but please जो थोड़ा बहुत बचा हुआ है, just read it quickly, and I will be more fast tomorrow. कल्चर बाय साइंस का मतलब सिंपली क्या है यार? इफ आई एम स्टडिंग कल्चरल फिनोमेना साइंटिफिकली, ठीक है, दैट इज बेसिकली व्हाट? स्टडिंग कल्चर साइंटिफिकली. So for example, suppose if I find like take any cultural tradition which is there, like I talked about the culture of not eating beef. एक एग्जाम्पल दिया था हमने, the culture of not eating beef in the Hindus. And if we go into this more scientifically, what could have been the reason? So we went into the historical aspect of this reason, and we found that the basic aspect was related with more with the carrying capacity. ठीक है. So I can I relate it with the carrying capacity concept, a more scientific concept? Yes or no? So that is the scientific study of culture. ठीक है. सो ऑल कल्चरल फीचर्स दे हैव देयर ओन बेस. लाइक और भी चीज़ें बता सकते हैं. लाइक फॉर एग्जाम्पल यू सी व्हेन वील स्टडी द इस्लामिक रीजन्स. So in Islamic regions you will be finding that you must have seen all these Islamic monuments which are there, heritage monuments which are present in India. So have you seen that in almost all of them you will be finding water fountains? देखा है? Always and always there would be water fountains. Other features like water conservation techniques would be there. Water harvesting structures would also be found there. Have seen that? Why? Because the Islamic culture developed where? It developed in deserts. And in the desert, there is scarcity of water. That's why they will always build fountain, because presence of water was a kind of status symbol. People who were more rich had more water. ठीक है. They had more water. Also that is why they, yes, symbol, it was more like a symbol of prosperity. Also because of the scarcity of water they had to invent these techniques of storage of water, and that is reflected in their culture. So we'll see lots of, that is basically a more scientific way of understanding the culture. We are going into the reasons of the culture. ठीक है. So I'll stop for today. We'll continue this tomorrow. Good night. Take care. ठीक है. So I'm going to stop. Good night all of you.